The Madrid Barajas airport was a pulsating hive of activity on a sweltering summer afternoon. The terminal echoed with the clatter of suitcases, the chatter of travelers in a dozen languages, and the relentless drone of boarding announcements. Sunlight streamed through towering glass windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Amid the chaos, a young man stood near the entrance to the first-class lounge, his presence almost invisible in the sea of hurried faces. He wore a black tracksuit, its sleeves slightly rolled up, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. A simple backpack hung loosely over one shoulder, its straps frayed from countless journeys. His dark skin glistened faintly under the fluorescent lights, and a quiet confidence radiated from his relaxed posture. At 25 years old, he was no stranger to the spotlight, but today he craved anonymity. This was Vinicius Jr., the electrifying star of Real Madrid, a global icon whose dazzling footwork and infectious smile had set stadiums ablaze. Yet, in this moment, he was just another traveler, seeking a brief respite before his flight. Before we dive into this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you love inspiring tales like this, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because tomorrow we've got another heart-pounding story waiting for you. Vinicius adjusted his cap, his fingers brushing the embroidered Lagoa's subtle nod to his Brazilian roots. He stepped toward the first-class lounge entrance, his ticket tucked in the pocket of his tracksuit. He wasn't here to flaunt his fame. After years under the relentless glare of cameras, he preferred to move quietly, especially when traveling. Today, he was flying to Paris for a crucial UEFA Champions League match against PSG, a game that could define Real Madrid's season. But all he wanted now was a moment of calm, a chance to sip water, scroll through his phone, and mentally prepare for the battle ahead. The lounge promised that a sanctuary of plush leather seats, soft jazz, and the faint clink of champagne glasses. Guarding the entrance was a stocky security guard, his uniform starched to perfection, his badge gleaming like a medal. His name tag read, Miguel, and his face bore a hardened scowl, as if the world had personally wronged him. Miguel prided himself on his instincts, his ability to read people at a glance. He believed he could spot who belonged in the elite first-class lounge and who was out of place. His eyes scanned the crowd with a practiced intensity, lingering on designer suits, luxury handbags, and polished shoes. When his gaze landed on Vinicius, his lip curled slightly. To Miguel, this young man in a tracksuit didn't fit the mold too casual, too young, too different. "Hey, you!" Miguel barked, stepping forward and blocking Vinicius's path. His voice sliced through the terminal's noise, drawing curious glances from nearby travelers. "This is the first-class lounge. You in the wrong place, amigo." Vinicius paused, his expression calm but curious. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his ticket, holding it out politely. "I'm going to the lounge," he said, his voice smooth with a faint Brazilian accent that carried a hint of warmth. Miguel didn't even glance at the ticket. He leaned closer, his eyes raking over Vinicius's tracksuit, cap, and sneakers. "Nice try," he scoffed, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "People like you don't just walk into first class. Go back to the regular line." He jerked his thumb toward the crowded check-in counters, his posture radiating authority. A few travelers slowed their steps, sensing the brewing tension. A woman in a sleek blazer, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder, frowned, her eyes darting between Vinicius and Miguel. A teenage boy with earbuds dangling around his neck nudged his friend, whispering, "What's this about?" A middle-aged couple pulling matching suitcases exchanged uneasy glances. Vinicius, however, remained unfazed. He held the ticket out again, his gaze meeting Miguel's with quiet resolve. This is my ticket, first class. Miguel snatched the ticket, his movements sharp and impatient. He scanned it with a handheld device, fully expecting an error to validate his suspicions. But the screen flashed green, and a soft beep confirmed its authenticity. For a split second, Miguel's scowl faltered, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. He quickly masked it with a forced laugh, thrusting the ticket back as if it burned his fingers. "This has to be a mistake," he muttered, his voice laced with disbelief. "You? First class? Come on, kid, who'd you borrow this from?" Vinicius's expression didn't shift, but his eyes held a quiet intensity, like a storm gathering beneath a calm sea. "It's mine," he said simply, his voice steady. "Can I go in?" Miguel crossed his arms, his stance widening as if to physically block the entrance. His voice dropped to a condescending growl. "Look, kid, I don't know how you got this ticket, but this lounge is for important people, not some guy who looks like he's here to mop the floors." The words landed like a slap, their racist undertone unmistakable. The woman in the blazer gasped softly, her hand tightening on her bag. The teenage boy pulled out his phone, his fingers already tapping to record. The middle-aged couple murmured to each other, their faces etched with discomfort. A small crowd began to form, drawn by the rising tension. But Vinicius didn't flinch. He stood still, his backpack steady on his shoulder, as if the insult hadn't touched him. "I just want to get to my flight," he said, his voice calm but firm, a quiet defiance in his tone. Miguel smirked, emboldened by the attention. "Flight? Sure, kid, stop wasting my time. Step aside or I'll make you." He gestured toward the terminal, his tone dripping with authority, as if he owned the lounge itself. The air grew thick with tension. The crowd swelled, phones raised, whispers turning to murmurs. The woman in the blazer stepped forward, her voice sharp and authoritative. "That's enough," she said, glaring at Miguel. "He showed you his ticket. Let him through." Miguel turned, his eyes narrowing. "Stay out of this, lady," he snapped, his voice rising. "I'm doing my job. This guy doesn't belong here, and I'm not letting him sneak in." The teenage boy's friend joined in, his voice loud and indignant. "Yo, just let him in. What's your problem, man?" Miguel ignored them, his focus locked on Vinicius. "You heard me," he said, stepping closer, his chest puffed out. "Move, or I'm calling backup." Vinicius sighed softly, adjusting his cap with a subtle flick of his wrist. "I'm not sneaking anywhere," he said, his voice steady as steel. "I paid for my ticket, same as everyone else." Miguel laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the terminal. "Paid for it? Right. Look at you, tracksuit, cap, acting like you're somebody. Go back to where you came from, kid." The racist implication hung heavy in the air. The crowd gasped, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The woman in the blazer muttered, "Unbelievable." The teenage boy's video zoomed in, his voice audible over the footage. "This guy's way out of line!" The middle-aged couple stepped closer, the husband speaking up. "You're crossing a line, sir," he said to Miguel. "Let the young man through." Miguel's face flushed with anger, his control slipping. He grabbed his radio, his voice booming with authority. "I need backup at the first-class lounge entrance. We've got a situation here." The crowd buzzed louder, phones capturing every second. A young mother pushing a stroller nearby frowned, whispering to her partner, "This is disgusting." A businessman in a tailored suit, sipping coffee from a to-go cup, shook his head, his expression grim. The woman in the blazer stepped closer, her tone unwavering. "You're making a huge mistake," she told Miguel. "Let him through before you regret this." Miguel ignored her, speaking into his radio with a snarl. "Yeah, some guy's trying to force his way into the lounge. Send someone now." Vinicius stood his ground, his backpack still slung over one shoulder. He could have pulled out his phone, shown his Instagram with 50 million followers, or dropped his name to end the confrontation. But he didn't. He chose silence, letting the situation unfold. His calmness was disarming, a stark contrast to Miguel's escalating frustration. Deep down, Vinicius felt the sting of Miguel's words, the familiar bite of prejudice he'd faced since arriving in Spain. But he refused to let it break him. He'd learned long ago that his strength lay not in anger, but in resilience. Moments later, 2 more security guards arrived, their expressions stern but professional. One, a younger woman named Sofia, glanced at Vinicius and then at Miguel. "What's the issue here?" she asked, her tone neutral. Miguel pointed at Vinicius, his voice thick with irritation. "This guy's trying to sneak into the lounge with a fake ticket or something. He doesn't belong here." Sofia frowned, taking the ticket from Miguel's hand. She scanned it again, and the green light flashed, accompanied by a soft beep. "The ticket's valid," she said, her voice calm but firm. "What's the problem?" Miguel's eyes widened, his confidence cracking. "The problem? Look at him. Does he look like he belongs in first class? He's probably using someone else's ticket." Sofia hesitated, glancing at Vinicius, who met her gaze with that same quiet intensity. She sensed something different about him, a presence that didn't need words to command respect. "Sir," she said to Vinicius, "can you show some ID, please?" Vinicius nodded, pulling out his passport and handing it over without a word. Sofia opened it, her eyes scanning the details. Suddenly, her expression shifted, recognition dawned, and her breath caught slightly. She leaned toward Miguel and whispered, "This is Vinicius Jr." Miguel froze, his face a mask of disbelief. "Who?" Sofia lowered her voice, her tone urgent. "Vinicius Jr., the Real Madrid player. You know, the guy who's been lighting up the Champions League? The one who scored that stunner against Bayern?" Miguel's face drained of color, his hands trembling as he snatched the passport. He stared at the name Vinicius José Paizón de Oliveira Junioras, if it were a puzzle he couldn't solve. "No way," he muttered, his voice barely audible. This isn't him." Vinicius remained silent, watching the exchange with a calm that unnerved Miguel further. The crowd was electric now, some catching Sofia's whisper. The teenage boy's live stream exploded with comments. "Is that Vini Jr.? This guard's done for." The woman in the blazer smiled faintly, sensing justice on the horizon. The businessman with the coffee clapped softly, a gesture of quiet support. Miguel handed the passport back, his hands shaking visibly. "Look, man," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "I didn't know who you were. Let's just forget this, okay? Go on in." But Vinicius didn't move. He looked at Miguel, his eyes steady but piercing, cutting through the guard's bravado like a blade. "You didn't need to know who I am," he said, his voice low but resonant, carrying the weight of years spent fighting prejudice. "You should have treated me like a person, like you treat everyone else." The words landed like a thunderclap, silencing the crowd. Phones remained raised, capturing the moment, but the air was thick with awe. The woman in the blazer nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. The teenage boy whispered to his friend, "That was epic." The middle-aged couple exchanged approving glances, the wife whispering, "He's right." Miguel opened his mouth, but no words came. He looked around, seeing the disapproving stares, the cameras, the weight of his mistake crashing down like a tidal wave. I'm sorry," Miguel stammered, his voice barely audible, his face flushed with shame. "I didn't mean... I was just doing my job." Vinicius shook his head slightly, his expression unwavering. "Your job isn't to judge people by how they look," he said, his tone firm but not cruel. "Your job is to let them through when they have a ticket, like me." Miguel swallowed hard, his arrogance shattered, replaced by a raw mix of shame and panic. Sophia stepped forward, her tone professional but authoritative. "Sir, please proceed to the lounge. We'll handle this." Vinicius nodded, adjusting his cap with a subtle flick. As he walked past Miguel, he didn't gloat or glare. He simply moved forward, his head held high, his dignity unbroken. The crowd parted for him, some whispering in awe, others clapping softly. The teenage boy followed, his camera still rolling, his stream now flooded with tens of thousands of viewers. Comments poured in. "Vini's a king!" "That guard's gonna regret this." Inside the first-class lounge, the atmosphere was a world apart from the terminal's chaos. Plush armchairs lined the room, soft jazz floated through the air, and the faint clink of crystal glasses created a cocoon of exclusivity. Vinicius found a quiet corner near a window, set his backpack down, and sank into a seat. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages from his teammates, his family, his friends. But the confrontation lingered in his mind, a familiar ache resurfacing. He'd faced racism before on the pitch, in the stands, in the media. Each time, it cut deep, but he refused to let it define him. He channeled it into his game, his joy, his defiance. He tapped out a quick message to his mother. "Another day, another fight. But I'm good, my." Back outside, Miguel stood frozen, his radio silent in his hand. Sophia and the other guard exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of pity and frustration. "You messed up, Miguel," Sophia said quietly, her voice tinged with disappointment. "That's Vinicius Jr. The guy's a legend." Miguel ran a hand over his face, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know," he muttered, staring at the floor. "He didn't say anything. He just stood there." "That's why he's different," Sophia said, her tone firm. "He didn't need to tell you who he is. You should have just done your job." The crowd began to disperse, but the teenage boy's video was already going viral. Clips of Miguel's insults, Vinicius's poised response, and the reveal of his identity spread like wildfire across social media. Hashtags like Vinicius Jr., Respect for All, and No to Racism trended within hours. Fans flooded the comments with praise for Vinicius's composure and outrage at Miguel's behavior. "This is why Vini's my hero," one tweet read. "He didn't need to shout. His silence spoke louder than anything." Inside the lounge, a flight attendant approached Vinicius, her smile warm and genuine. "Mr. Vinicius," she said softly, her eyes sparkling with admiration. "It's an honor to have you with us. Can I get you anything?" Vinicius looked up, his expression softening. "Just water, please," he said, his voice gentle. "And thank you." The attendant nodded, her gaze lingering with respect. As she walked away, an older man in a nearby seat, his suit impeccably tailored, leaned over. "I saw what happened out there," he said, his voice low but sincere. "You handled that with more grace than most could dream of. Respect, young man." Vinicius gave a small smile, his eyes warm but weary. "I just wanted to get to my flight," he said, a hint of humor in his tone. "That's all." The man shook his head, his expression one of deep admiration. "You're a class act, Vinicius. Keep shining. The world needs more like you." As the boarding call for the Paris flight echoed through the lounge, Vinicius gathered his things, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. He walked toward the gate, his steps steady, his focus shifting to the match ahead. But the story wasn't over. Miguel's actions had ignited a spark that would blaze far beyond the airport, touching hearts and sparking conversations around the world. At the gate, a small crowd had gathered, not just passengers, but airport staff. Word had spread like wildfire, and a few recognized Vinicius as he approached. A young baggage handler whispered to his colleague, "That's him, Vini Jr." A cleaner paused her work, her eyes wide with awe as she clutched her broom. A security officer, stationed nearby, gave Vinicius a subtle nod of respect. Vinicius returned the gesture, his smile brief but genuine, unaware of the ripple effect he'd already caused. Meanwhile, Miguel sat in a cramped office near the terminal, his supervisor pacing in front of him, his face a storm of anger and disbelief. "Do you realize what you've done?" The supervisor snapped, slamming a tablet onto the desk. The screen displayed the viral video, its view count climbing by the second. "That was Vinicius Jr., the Vinicius Jr., and you humiliated him in front of a crowd." Miguel stared at the floor, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I didn't know," he whispered, his voice cracking. "He didn't look like a star." The supervisor threw his hands up, exasperated. "That's not the point. You judged him because of his clothes, his skin, his accent, and now it's all over the internet. The airline's getting slammed, and you're the face of this disaster." Miguel's face crumpled, his voice barely audible. I thought I was protecting the lounge." "You weren't protecting anything," the supervisor said, his tone cutting. "You were abusing your power. We've had complaints about you before, Miguel. This isn't the first time you've profiled passengers, made snap judgments. But this is a catastrophe. You're suspended pending a full investigation, and frankly, I wouldn't count on keeping your job." Miguel's eyes widened, panic setting in. "What? You can't! I've been here 10 years!" "And in 10 years, you should have learned to treat people with respect," the supervisor said, his voice final. "Get your things and go home. We'll be in touch." Miguel slumped in his chair, the weight of his actions crashing down. Outside, the world was reacting with a fury he couldn't have imagined. The viral video had reached millions, sparking global debates about racism, respect, and resilience. Fans of Vinicius flooded social media with messages of support, sharing clips of his goals, his iconic goal celebrations, his journey from the favelas of São Gonçalo to the hallowed turf of the Santiago Bernabéu. "This is why Vini's special," one Instagram post read.